Okay, everybody, I know I'm really late. But you guys let me down. I need more stuff to talk about than a couple of hashtags. So what I did was I spent much of the morning trying to finish a deck I started a few days ago. I wanted to show what I call the long arc of disruption. And so rather than start with my normal, because there are 38 slides, I want to begin with talking about what my purpose in this deck is. And for those of you in the Telegram chat, because I know I don't have anybody so far in either the Rumble or Pilled chat, the purpose of this is more a recording than anything, I guess. But what I wanted to show is that while we talk about Trump in all his glory, we're a Trump-centric crowd, my purpose was also to show that there is a long history that points to what Trump is doing, how it was pulled together, and the fact that when he says, quote, "I studied history," it is absolutely true. So please feel free to jump in with comments, questions, anything you have as I go through this. But what we're going through today has a very long history, and that history is something that needs to be discussed, it needs to be embraced, it needs to be celebrated, because as you will see, peace is absolutely the prize, but it didn't start under Trump. Let's jump right into the long arc of disruption. By the way, I love my slides. Absolutely love my slides.
They're gorgeous.
They are gorgeous.
So I wanted to begin with the dependency grid, what I call the dependency grid. I've carefully showed you the history of the sticky powers of Brussels and the financial plumbing of the City of London, and showed you how that system, the shadow banking system, was leveraged and created a lot of crises. Am I blaming Brussels directly? Am I blaming City of London directly? Let's just say when you develop a system that is designed to create a revenue stream for yourself, you open up leverage and incentives for other systems to do the same thing. And I'm going to show you how those cross paths. So here we have one architecture, right? You've got the sticky power, in other words, the rules from Brussels that are financed by the financial plumbing in the City of London. And that part and parcel through them and through other systems has created an environment of absolute chaos around the world. I only put the ones that have been in the news lately, but every conflict since the 70s fits into this model. Okay. So pretty hard to dismiss, don't you think? So let's talk about Brussels. When Brussels creates the rules, they can create the environment that says, if you don't comply, we can take action. And they do that through all of these sub-agencies. So one of the ones that you know of real recently is through Russia, when they cut Russia off of the SWIFT system. But they've used the ECB, the IMF, the World Trade Organization. They've used sanctions extensively. They've withheld money from certain regions that weren't quite playing by the rules. And of course, as we know, the UN has been completely captured and does their bidding as well, because increasingly, especially, the US isn't playing their game as much. So that this is how they keep the UN alive. But what I wanted to get into here, the instruments of control that Brussels has always used are still in place today. And when I talk about Trump, I've said it many times, he's not talking to the Iranians lately or even to the Lebanese. He's talking to this system. And I think I can prove it today. Hopefully I can. You'll have to let me know. But let me go into the City of London, because City of London isn't just this monolithic 1 mile square. There are several offshore sites that have weak regulations, weak oversight, and it allowed for the shadow banking system to move money quickly, to make sure that petrodollars got converted into euro dollars and it got moved quickly outside of the U.S. regulatory process and inside a system they built that was designed to overlook regulations, the actually oversight in general, which is why sanctions became heavily used, because when the U.S. applied sanctions, they also apply that to all of their partners. If you do business with, in fact, Trump has come out and said that explicitly, if you do business with anybody we've sanctioned, we're now sanctioning you. And so that has really curbed the old method, if you will. But nevertheless, that routing architecture is how money moves. And this is how they made sure that that money could move, by developing the rules for other countries to follow, which puts these other countries in a position where they either do as they're told or they lose a lot of revenue, further sinking their own countries into third world status, for lack of a better word. So let me keep that going, because what they've done by building this system is they've created a self-sustaining loop. You make the rule, you enforce the rule, you route the capital according to those who are following the rule, and then that capital comes back in. It creates more of a dependency, and it is an endless cycle that has created conflict forever. I mean, for most of us, for all of our lives. Go back to the Kennedy assassination when they were emboldened, and you start seeing Vietnam. Why did it last so long? Those kinds of things. When you've got the Korean conflict, never declared a war. Why? Because Congress declares the war and the deep state can't. So it's a conflict that we still have many soldiers there to this day at the demilitarized zone, or the DMZ. So now you start to see how this comes together. And when you pull that together, when you think about what that's doing, then I think it's fair to say there's a pattern here that can be absolutely observed, wouldn't you think? Because the pattern is repetitive. Go ahead.
Well, the machine works.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
When did the Brussels, when did they start? When did they come into who they are?
The EU. That's the EU. They were there before, but when the EU was formed, Brussels is the heart of the EU.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And that was 1993, correct?
Yeah, 92, 93. I remember those debates in college very well.
Oh, yeah. They're not going to make it. They're going to make it. They're not going to make it.
I gave them 20 years. I was a little off. So what do you think of this? Do you see this loop? Does it make sense to you? Is it something that, as you sit back and you reflect on everything I've tried to show you, all the different decks come together? I'm hoping that this deck pulls all of those other decks together. Is it starting to do that for you?
It's flowing tremendously, and the more information we get, the more apparent it becomes of how deep, how structured they are, mm-hmm. and how much influence they've had over every country.
A global world order is one of those things that we've all known about. We've all heard about. We've had perpetrators tell us about it, right? A global world order is both a warning over the last 7 decades, as well as an absolute truth bomb to show that there's something behind everything we're watching. What you see wrong, there's a global world order has been tagged to all of that. And a lot of people poo-poo it, saying there's no such thing as a deep state. Well, now you got the deep state admitting there's a deep state. There's no such thing as a global world order. Well, that's absolutely been rebuffed for decades with the World Economic Forum and such like that, CFR, Trilateral Commission. We know there's a global world order. Bilderberg has always been put up at the top, but it's actually one of the more subservient groups. But the fact of the matter is there has been a global world order. And I didn't pull into this deck research on what they call the internationals. There was a secretive international formed in the 70s called the Fifth International. And when you pull that together and recognize that that was a conservative, and I'm using air quotes, which gives rise, by the way, to more Trotskyism, and I'll show that in a minute. But what I'm trying to show is that when the quest for power and control supersedes everything, and I showed you the other day where morality is removed from the system, ethics are removed from the system, God removed from the discussion, it allowed this system to thrive. Hopefully you can see that. So let me talk about it because the pattern does repeat. It's not just a simple thing. This is a repetitive pattern we've been watching for the last at least 26 years. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. So since 2001, since 9/11, we had the financial system was exposed, right? The misuse of that system to fund terrorism was absolutely exposed. You've heard me talk about this many times, how money was funneled from many areas around the world to the CIA to help create the conditions that created 9/11, which just happened to, it's just a coinkydink, of course, happened the day after Donald Rumsfeld declared a war on bureaucracy, right? It just, and quite literally some of the things that happened in the 90s. In 2002 and 2005, we actually had early warnings. We actually knew that there was a use of global banks and shell companies that was doing this. These all came out of investigations that happened directly as a result of 9/11. 9/11 Commission report in 2003, 2002, 2003, actually has an area, a good-sized area, piece of it is still under classification. It's never been released. And my research, my belief, my opinion is that it's because it's talking directly to what I'm going to show you today. And of course, then we have the financial crises, which had it not been, and I can't believe I'm saying this all these years later, but had it not been for the $700 billion infusion, our economy would have collapsed and hence our country. So I can also see the other side where that was absolutely necessary. So when I hear van der Leyen say that, when I hear people from our own government say, they would do it again, that it was necessary, I get it, because that was a complete takedown of our financial system, and had it not, and it was because of the incentive layer in the shadow banking, misuse of that shadow banking system, it went on steroids, and because of that, we ended up with the too big to fail. We ended up with benchmark manipulation. That's where, if you remember 2012, we get the exposure of the LIBOR scandal where they were manipulating the interest rate. So you not only have terrorist organizations manipulating the system, there's a direct connect to the City of London manipulating the system. And all of this came out of the 2008 crises. So for me, it squares now finally that we can actually say without a doubt that the $700 billion infusion in 2008 was a needed piece. I don't know that the system was ready to deal with the rest of the reason behind it, but we do have a problem. We do have a problem that is brewing, and it really came out in 2008. 2012, we start seeing really big cracks. You got the scandals, you got parallel network exposures. 2012 is actually a pivotal year because that's the same year that the LIBOR scandal is exposed as the Zanjani network was exposed. They both happened at the same time, and it's as a result of all the investigations that were created because of 2008. So what you have, like I said, it's a self self-sustaining system with Brussels and the City of London, but you now see where the incentives are increasingly including terrorist organizations, where Zanjani comes in. So now you've got two parties manipulating the system. 2013 to 2016, when I show you this, this is what we call the leak era. Every single year, just about, you had a major paper released that proved the offshore system that these guys down in the bottom were exposing and paid dear price for it, for doing so. All of them had their lives disrupted and completely upended. Scott Bennett, unfortunately, passed away just a couple of years ago, but you have absolute whistleblowers backing up what is said in these papers that were leaked. Now notice Stephen Bennett came out in 1988. The leaks didn't start till 2013. The impetus for those leaks was because of the exposure of the shadow banking system and its fractures, its problems. So then you got the globalist enablers. You've got from 2017 to 2020, and it's an average, okay, because you start to see it in 2016 and it did continue beyond. But you had all these geopolitical conflicts. And who can forget our ships being stalled in the water and having crashes? Who can forget the Strait of Hormuz being trapped in a system? Remember the interesting thing in the Suez Canal in 2021. So, I mean, keep coming down through this. You've got the shadow systems started to accelerate by the time we get to 2017. And why is that? You've got the City of London and Brussels system started to accelerate as an anti-Trump method, which increased the terrorism centers that we're seeing. So this is why you see this huge explosion starting the end of 2016, beginning in 2017. So while everybody's focused on Crossfire Hurricane, which is important, this is going on globally. And then finally, from 2021 to today, we're watching an interesting turn of events, de-dollarization, which is a big deal. And why is that? Because if you de-dollarize, then you bring about the collapse of the US dollar, unless there's another plan in place, which is where the blockchain comes in. It's not the complete solution, but it is a huge solution, because if money can be verified and validated, then it can be in the system. If not, it's locked out of the system because of the immutable blockchain, right? The immutable record on the blockchain. So what I wanted to point out today is the architecture that I just showed you, which was leveraged and used by less than savory organizations, also did it in response to what the City of London and Brussels were doing. And now you've got this complete cycle. And like I said, you can't dismiss the fact that, where am I? You can't dismiss the fact that there is, what's the word I'm looking for? A concerted effort, a plan. This is where power and control goes rogue, and good people doing tough things are constantly behind the eight ball because technology did not move as fast as their activities to circumvent the system did. And so it takes years to put this stuff together. And I know that's not a strong comment to be made. A lot of people roll their eyes with that because you've seen these problems for so long. But there is quite a need here to evolve technology to the point where we can be in a more steady state of enforcement. One of the key things to that is you've got to literally break the back of the Brussels, City of London system that they built. So every time I say, like I said, every time you talk about Trump and what he's saying about Iran, he kept talking about the hardliners. He kept talking about he's got this deal that's in the works that looks like it's about to be signed. I haven't checked today, with Iran. But there are still people trying to muck the waters. He's not talking about the Iranians. And for that, I really think it's time to really sit back and dig in a little further. What do you think so far?
It's amazing. I love how you brought it up from 9/11 till today, and you can see the evolution of all of this. And yeah, your idea about sitting back, I think that's really good. I don't want to be on tenterhooks. I know now because you've shown us that it's not the IGRC and it's not the hardliners. It's these people that are running these networks that are controlling the country and the decisions that are being made. So yes, that's important for us to know. Very, very important. Thank you.
You're welcome. So let me show you something interesting that I don't think a lot of people realize. You've known about a lot of these papers. What I didn't realize is the Cyprus papers were released, but they weren't released in total. There's still a very secretive piece to the Cyprus papers, but they were actually released in 2018. But go back to 2013. Remember, we had the exposure in 2012 of the LIBOR scandal, the Zanjani network. 2013, you get the offshore leaks, and that's where literally hundreds of thousands of offshore entities were moving money outside of oversight, and they were all secrecy areas. Now, remember, shadow plumbing, the City of London shadow banking system has 6 offshore entities. And that's what this was showing. It was proving money was moving outside of the scope of oversight. 2014, you got the Luxembourg leaks. Now that's interesting because the Iranian revolution started in 2014. And by the way, the original suspicious activity report that came forward was the money that was released from Burisma and Privat Bank in Ukraine, and Luxembourg is the one with that suspicious activity report in 2014. And I've been talking about this for years about how Ukraine is a money siphon. The Swiss leaks came out in 2015. I don't know if you guys remember this, but we had all of this information that came out showing that Swiss banking was secretive and hiding some illicit cash transfers. Paradise Papers in 2017, tax evasion. So it showed the role of what I call the enablers, the professional services, lawyers, accountants, all of that. It showed how they helped create these shell companies, and that those shell companies were used as an air of legitimacy. As an example, many of them would have an address in the City of London to give the air of legitimacy. But at the same time, they were actually a shell company moving money. Thank you for the cookie, Tweety. And S. Jones gifted or she claimed a bronze tier. Oh, okay, wait a minute. S. Jones gifted it, and then I can't say your name. I can't even say your name. John in OKC. Okay, Oklahoma. Okay, John in Oklahoma. It took me a minute. You took the, S. Jones gifted it. You took the gift, and S. Jones, you bought a 3-month bronze tier subscription. Thank you. Those are really helpful to me, by the way, guys. I appreciate that. So then we get the Cyprus papers in 2003. This was the gateway set of papers. I've talked about this many times because there's a lot to those papers that still have not been exposed. But what you do get from this is how money moved from Europe to Russia and the Middle East. This was that gateway set of papers, and it's a big deal because it showed that there was absolutely a bridge, and this becomes important when you get into the pallets of cash, by the way, but it's the bridge between the East and the West. The FinCEN files showed that the system knew but intentionally looked the other way. And that gets back to the whistleblowers. They all said the same thing. It was an intentional system. And as much as AI hated the idea of me saying this on this slide, it actually agreed in the end that it was an important marker to note was that the system itself, people within the system intentionally looked the other way because they too were benefiting. Obviously in 21, actually, I think it was in October of 20, but September, October of 20, but the Pandora papers came out. And if you recall in the Q post, those papers were a particular risk to Democrats. So that's a big deal because it showed the hidden wealth of many of these global leaders, right? Thank you, Wonderworld, for the gift of the cookie. I appreciate it. And then, of course, the Bahama leaks that came out in 22. This was all about FTX. Who can forget FTX, right? This included the whole idea of the oversight in offshore jurisdictions as sanctions increased, as attention to detail increased, as enforcement started to increase. They moved from moving actual money, moving into primarily it was originally Bitcoin. Now it's Tether. But this is what that exposed in the FTX cycle was that big money was moving through FTX to fund candidates, to fund, actually recruit and fund candidate campaigns, and to fund some of the terrorism we're watching. And in particular, this gets into the Ukraine story as well as the Hamas story. So I really wanted to point this out because you can see this steady erosion since 2013, despite what the whistleblowers did. Trump country, $20. Thank you so much. She gifted $20. If you look at from the beginning, from the very beginning, if you look at how we've had whistleblowers saying, hey, we got a problem here. And this people within the system absolutely went after these people, from Stephen Bennett to Scott Bennett. And there's others, by the way, but I can only fit 4 on the slide. But those individuals were trying to warn of this problem. They paid dearly for warning of the problem. And as a result of what was uncovered as a result of the 2008 crash with the 2012 LIBOR scandal and the Zanjani network, we've got all these leaks that came out that absolutely proves what these men were talking about. So how does that connect for you? That's my opening. Now I'm going to get into the brass knuckles, because in order to keep your system running, you have to have a crisis. Crises is a money siphon, purposefully. And it became a system of governance. Create the crises, we create rules around that crisis, we funnel money to that crisis, and that dependency loop continues. So you got to have a crisis. It's absolutely necessary. Let me show you one thing, though, that I don't know. We can talk about this from a system perspective all we want, but it was never an abstract cost, because entire societies absorbed the consequences, both financially and literally through the degradation of our quality of life, as well as through the loss of people that we're all connected to, whether it was through war, through COVID, whatever. People have been killed. We've had mass people over, that have died. And these crises, like I said, it's not just war, it's also pandemics, which we've had several since 2004, by the way. But you have all of this is happening with an absolute cost to the people, which is creating this environment that, while they talk down about MAGA, when they talk down about what it was the word I'm looking for, the populist movements around the world, it is the people fighting back because they're starting to see it. Let me show you what they're seeing, because there were ecosystems built. You already saw the Brussels and City of London ecosystem. Let me show you some of the other ecosystems. We've got an invisible infrastructure for finance and offshore. This is what Brussels, City of London leveraged. So did several terrorist groups. But this is a big one in that this is how you develop that ecosystem. You develop a shell company using your enablers, and they create trusts, foundations, and nominees for these groups. The boards, that's secrecy boards, right? You don't know who really owns any of these companies or where it's going. That creates an environment where you can now offshore banking to private accounts and create tax havens, because they're in areas of the world where there's really almost no oversight, no regulation. Many of these places have no corporate tax liability. It's borne by the people on those islands or those regions. So this is a huge thing, because you got the enablers, and those enablers created a system of illicit finance that hid wealth, that distorted the economies of countries, and created an environment where trust and legitimacy in the systems around the world were eroded. And it was great to blame big corporations. It was great to blame the banks. It was great to blame the leaders of countries. But this is in the behind the scenes. This is the shadow layer that's doing this. And that in and of itself is the impetus needed to create global instability and increase systemic risk. So hopefully now you're seeing everything I've been trying to talk about for the last, 6-7 months. You're seeing it in real life. You can now intuitively understand what I'm saying here. Am I correct? Is this following something you can understand? And if you can't, please ask the questions. And for those of you in Rumble and Pilled, I know there's a delay. Ask the questions. I'm watching. I will get back to the questions. But for those of you in the Telegram chat, I'm hoping that there's some interaction here for any questions, any thoughts, anything that's, if there's an aha for you, I'd like to hear it, if that's okay.
It brings to mind two things. Sorry, carry on.
Go ahead, Leslie.
It just brought two things to mind.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing when Hillary says to Trump about not paying his tax, and he says he's abiding by the rules that they've set.
Right.
So you can see how the rules and regulations enable people to do
right.
the wrong thing.
Yes, as they were increasing.
Or not the right thing.
Exactly. As they were increasing taxes, you remember the whole moniker, the wealthy have to pay their fair share. They would pass a law that actually put the burden on the middle class, because in that same law, they would put an exception or a workaround that the wealthy used. So it was constantly hiding the money, and Trump filed his taxes accordingly. Was it to keep the money, or was it to figure out the system and how it was working? I think that's a debate we can have. I think it's a valid debate. But the fact of the matter is, the wealthy were never intended to bear the burden of the financial distress they were creating. You can see that.
And the second thing was, Trump saying to G, he was doing all these things over in America. He said, why was you doing that? He says, because nobody stopped us.
Right. In fact,
so again, same thing.
Xi said the same thing when Trump asked about what China was doing and exploiting the U.S. economy. Xi said the same thing to Trump. Nobody stopped it.
That's what I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he said nobody stopped me doing it, so they just carried on.
They carried on.
So you can see again with all these systems, they're set into place. They've got away with it, so then it just perpetuates. They set these other things go wrong, people find out about it, and then they try another way around. So yeah, you can see that pattern.
Mm-hmm. So Angela, you were going to say something?
Yes, sorry there. I think it's fascinating the way you have these slides laid out, because people realize that there's a deep state, but it's nebulous, it's vague. They don't know where to find it. They don't know how it works. They don't know anything about it. They know that these folks, or maybe they don't realize they're on an elective. But these slides are beautiful because they show the flow of how the power works. And then they tell the backstory of how it was built, underneath our view. So it becomes a lot more real. It becomes a lot more tangible, whereas before it's really vague and nebulous. This is a beautiful way. People understand it. They need to see something or grasp something. This is a really beautiful way. I have a lot of friends that know they're confused and not sure, what's happening. They can't put their finger and touch anything. This is beautiful. This is a wonderful way to bring it alive for them, and they can see it.
Well, I'm glad you like them. For many of you, though, and I'm just going to point this out, I'm putting on a slide stuff we've talked about. And I keep trying to find a new way of retelling the same story, hoping that one way will get people to the point where they go, oh, I get it. Because if you get it, then you become part of the solution, right?
Right, but this is, you're laying it out perfectly now. This is so easy to conceptualize and to see. It becomes intuitive almost. It's not confusing anymore. It's clear.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad to hear that. You also are cheating because you have the whole deck in front of you, but
well, no, but I haven't. I scrolled through them. They were just like eye candy. I didn't look at all of them, but that first one, the way you drew the lines, that's what people. Those are the connections people can't make because they don't know, and you always tell the history, so you always put it in a way that it's easy to digest for people who don't know.
Mm-hmm. So this system here on this slide is the legitimate system, right? This is what the shadow banking system was designed to do. That the system itself began to leverage to keep creating crises, right? Because this is what they used to force other countries to do their bidding. So embedded in this system is dare I say, a nefarious intent. If you're gonna do as I tell you, then I'm gonna use my very system that I've carefully built to force you to do as I tell you. But that created a sideline. We talk about terrorism. We talk about Hamas. We know for a fact that Hamas was on the UN payroll. We know for a fact that these shadow networks, Zanjani, Shamkhani, go down the list. I showed that just the other day. In fact, we know that these networks were using this type of system to circumvent sanctions, to circumvent any other legal paths that were an impediment so that they could continue to fuel and fund terrorism. I'm going to show you some things today that are going to be very unsettling. I'm just going to forewarn you before I go any further. Let me show you the Iran-Hezbollah network. So again, you got Iranian state support. What is the purpose here? Well, we've had Iran under sanctions since 1979. And we've continually squeezed Iran to where their reaction was, we've got to stop it. They included a terrorism network as part of it, which none of us agree is the right thing. But their response was in direct opposition to the squeeze created by the Brussels City of London system. So they too use the same offshore exchanges in the same areas. In fact, they even included a couple others. They started trading gold and commodities, specifically gold for oil. Their cash couriers were the Hawala network, which is a trust-based system that goes back to biblical times, by the way. They used their own front companies and they evaded SWIFT sanctions because of the restrictions from the City of London or more Brussels. This whole network they built was to evade the sanctions that were being placed on them. Funds were being frozen. This gets into the pallets of cash that Obama sent under Obama's tenure. But where did it happen? Because the system actually protected itself. The EU itself had loopholes that allowed the carve-outs that you're seeing that continued to fund a lot of this terrorism. You got the offshore finance, NGOs, and the charity base. Huge capital siphon. Legal shields, because now you got your enabler your enabler layer is kicked in. And then you've got your SWIFT corridors where money is legitimately moved through the SWIFT system. And then they started using indirect access, using smaller correspondent banks instead of the larger banks. And that created a huge environment for money laundering, because the too big to fail syndrome out of 2008 had to be circumvented, right? So now you see this. So you got terror, you got militias, you got political influence. We've seen that, narcotics, illicit commerce. All of this became a part of the system used to funnel money for the Iranian Hezbollah system. Let me keep going. We got the shadow fleet out of Russia. Now, this is really important because we've been squeezing Russia, especially since 2013-14. And Russia, the more sanctions put onto Russia, they created a shadow fleet to keep their own economy going. And most of those shadow fleet tankers are under sanction. But it created the exact same system, and I'm not defending any country here. Dark shipping, non-Western services, alternative markets, sanctions pressure is what created it, and ship supply and ownership. What did it create? It actually helped to fund Russia-Ukraine war. So you want to talk about stopping the Ukraine war? Yeah, you want to cut off the money flow, not just to Russia, but remember, there's two sides to that coin, because the Brussels City of London network, the first one I showed you, is funding the other side. So Russia's funding itself. Brussels City of London is funding the Ukrainian side, and you're creating an environment of perpetual war. And for Russia, it's absolutely about the survival of Russia because of the noise about nuclear. And then you've got the security risks and the global price distortions that are creating environments where they're moving the ship, moving the oil, moving their produce at discounted prices became necessary. And then you got proliferation. You got not just the idea of using influence, but you're creating an environment where you're using energy as a leverage. The more energy was suppressed, Iran and other areas, the more influence Russia was gaining. So you're watching this whole system come into play, the Brussels City of London system come into play for Russia. Let me show you another one. This is the Mekong cyber scam. This is a big deal too, because of the absolute impact of all of this. Remember, I showed you the other day that just the Iranian piece is upwards of $200 billion. This entire set of networks, and I'm only showing you a few of them, is about $4 to $6 trillion annually. So we're not talking small dollars here. In this gray zone of China, you got an empire that was developed to produce illegal revenue. They had compounds, they had casinos and entertainment. Big thing for human trafficking, by the way, trafficking in illegal operations. They were using, and still are using to some extent, Tether, Bitcoin, Ethereum. In fact, Bitcoin and Ethereum have been in the news lately, by the way, and I'm waiting for Tether to actually, because they've banned Tether in a lot of places in the world, I'm waiting for the US to follow suit, which I think will come with the Clarity Act. Stablecoin settlement systems are using predominantly Tether and USDC. And then the global cash out networks. But look at the enabler layer again, weak state governance, right? Same thing, Chinese influence, regulatory blind spots, technology misuse, financial system exploitation, and global demand and impunity. So when you put this piece together, this is a scam system that was used in Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia. They forced traffic labor camps, right? Forced labor trafficking and coercion, 24/7 online scam operations targeting global victims, infrastructure built for scale and secrecy. And when you put all that together to show, remember I showed you the slide on the actual human cost to all of this. Somebody's always exploited, somebody's always making money. So here is the cartel trade influence network. And hopefully you're starting to think to yourself, wait a minute, hasn't Trump disrupted all of these? I'll show you that cat. Go. So the cartel trade finance system, again, the same system. It's a plug and play where they're using that same offshore system to develop import-export firms to gain access to the Western financial system and to manipulate documents. Now, I don't know how many of you understand what the term, Takaka, you donated 131 gold pills. Thank you so much. When I look at a term called drop shipping, it really gets exciting for me because I worked for a company before we moved to Virginia. I worked for a company called Digital Equipment Corporation, and we caught equipment that wasn't supposed to go to Russia being loaded on a ship to go straight to Russia. And we notified the Department of Commerce about it. And how did it happen? It was through a process called drop shipping, where the produce or the product takes one path, but the documents that belong to that product or produce, whatever is being shipped, the documents take a second path. And that's where the document manipulation comes into, because what you do is you produce fake invoices, packing lists and such like that. You misuse the codes when you're invoicing, and then you declare a value different than what you're doing, and it produces fake certificates of origin, and then the data is spoofed and the documents are forged. So the drop shipping became a big deal. And what's interesting is one of the big things that was implemented into the shipping process is a thing called smart contracts, which starts to tackle this. You got distribution and trafficking in this cartel. The street distribution networks from the U.S. throughout the world, cartels, cells and proxies, violence, street gangs, all of that comes into play. The tunnel operations on the border, the global trade routes. You've heard me talk about how Sinaloa, with the cartel of the Suns, took over in a large part the Belt and Road trade routes through Africa, controlled those, and those routes then controlled what was coming into Europe. So you got a huge story here with this just the cartel trade finance system that we've been watching being dismantled now for several years. It's not just recently. And then you got the Dubai Gulf. This is good, the arbitrage one, because if you recall, UAE arrested dozens of money changers. And then 2 days later, Secretary of State Rubio revoked the visas for Soleimani's niece and grandniece just 2 days later. What were those money changers a part of? They were part of the network that was funding Al-Qud, which is what Soleimani's network was. So they were living high off the hog here in the U.S. from this shadow network. And when Dubai made those arrests, it allowed us to do something else. Free for All gifted the phone. My goodness, thank you. I take it you're enjoying the presentation. So the rules constantly were changing depending on who benefited from the rules. And I think that's the thing to take away from the last several slides that I showed, is that the system itself, because of its very nature and how it's developed, is flexible enough to tweak whenever something changes, which is why it's so evasive, right? No matter what rules we put in place, the system is developed in such a way that it's just a tweak of a rule and we can keep going as if nothing has happened. And those really happen literally happen as a result of Brussels, right? Because there's exemptions built into the rules. There's loopholes and waivers that are granted. And we saw that even with the Russia shadow fleet, they built in waivers. Bailouts and rescues are socialized. Now, in other words, the system never has to pay. And then the offshore jurisdictions are constantly protected because they never come to the surface. And then liquidity overrides happen because you can, with these waivers, with these exceptions, you're bypassing the rules. And there's absolutely no accountability, which is why you never see anyone held accountable except for those who are trying to issue a clarion warning against what's going on. So this is, I guess, my breather slide before I get into some other nuts and bolts. What do you guys think so far?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So when you were talking about the shipping and all of that, do you think that Elaine Chao, when she was in that position in the first Trump administration, that she was helping to map out a lot of that transportation issues with shipping containers, with other things like that, where the routes were and where things were coming from?
I wouldn't have said yes until, in fact, I never did say yes until in my research, I found out that she was also tracing and tracking antiquities that were stolen from countries and returning them. So that as a result of watching the shipping and how the shadow fleets were being developed and how illicit product was being moved, I would have to say, yes, I agree. Elaine Chao was doing exactly what you said. I know that's not a popular thought or opinion. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I do believe that. After seeing all of the work that's being done to dismantle so much of this, somebody would have had to delve deep into the roadmap of that. And I think she was pretty kind of under the radar. We didn't hear a lot about her. Didn't hear a lot about her work. So I think she was pretty stealthy.
Well, one of the things that always confused me because, of course, of my career, Elaine Chao under Bush 2 was the Secretary of Labor. And I was so confused when Trump appointed her as Secretary of Transportation. I could not figure out how the two crossed. The only thing I could figure out is that her family was in shipping out of Taiwan, which was an exiled nation, right? So that's the only thing I could think of, but I could never quite connect the dots until I saw a couple of articles where antiquities were being returned, and she was at the helm of doing that. And then it started to connect. It was the shipping piece, I think, that brings her to light, that shows how you can get inside a system and start to, at least if you have a snapshot of what the system is doing, then you can do something to dismantle it. That's my thought anyway. And I know that'll be challenging, that's fine, but we're not supposed to like Elaine Chao because of Mitch McConnell, right?
But we do. So
let me continue, because the system itself was built with so many exceptions that the wealthy got wealthier, the poor got poorer, and money moved. Now everybody's talking about the $1.7 billion from 2015-16. Did you know there was $12 billion that was sent to Iraq in 2003 and 4? Same pallets of cash. Did you know about that? So the $1.7 billion to Iraq is a far cry from the $12 billion sent to Iran. Rather, is a far cry from the $12 billion sent to Iraq, which perpetuated that war, right? But what it is a manual liquidity override. Literally, it is the exception in the system that is funding all these wars. And like I said, these are only the ones that are in the news today, but I don't think it's a hard stretch to understand that all of our conflicts were funded like this, right? So the currency is literally overriding the checks and balances of the system and moving through pallets of cash. Right, the 2003 one to Iraq, they claim it was to keep the government functioning. That's why we had a 26-year war, but it completely emptied out New York at the time. So, what is your thought on that? Because this is a big deal. The cash airlifts, $12 billion in $100 bills, flown on a C-130 military aircraft. Billions vanished. No receipts, no audits, no accountability. This is in 2003 and 4. I'm going to show you something really neat here in a minute. And then the same thing happened in 2015-16 with the 1.7 billion. Notably for me, and this was in euros and Swiss francs as well as US dollars. What is interesting to me is the difference, right? 12 billion in 2003 to 1.7 billion. In other words, something has changed, but it hasn't completely been ended. Do you see that? Or don't you?
That's what I was kind of thinking. Like, what's the incentive for these countries and individuals to get out of this network that's making them rich beyond their wild imaginations?
Well,
it was collapsing.
The incentive is if you want access to the market, you sign on to the bilateral trade agreements and the peace accords, right? And is one of the interventions that Trump is implementing. And I'll show you
Couldn't
that.
they all join forces though and like override and kind of?
So how do you join forces? Where are you joining forces at? I guess would be my question. And which is why I keep saying Trump isn't talking to Iran. He's talking to Brussels in the city of London. That's why I keep saying that. You got to break that back. Because these regions, and we've heard some comments made in the past that support it, these regions don't want endless conflict, but it's survival of their country that's at stake. So if you remove the incentive, then peace can be achieved, don't you think?
For sure. If you can, there's no reason to stay in the system.
Right.
I mean,
and that's what I'm noticing here between 2003 and 4 and 2016 is obviously the incentives have been greatly reduced. Wouldn't you agree? From 12 billion to 1.7 billion.
Well, that's just one marker. I mean, there's other things that you look at, but it was like Russia, when the Ukraine war started, Russia was getting out, right? Mm-hmm. They were losing pieces. Then you had BRICS kind of join up, which they were losing that piece. So it was weakening the system as it went on. I don't know why countries decided.
So do you know when BRICS was formed?
It was what in
2009.
Was it really that early?
Yes. Do you know who was at the table when BRICS was formed? Japan. They were never formally a member of the BRICS coalition, but they've been at every meeting. I think this is why Abe was murdered. But BRICS was formed in 2009. It was a direct result of the 2008 crash. It was the recognition that unless they became independent of the US dollar, that their survival was at stake.
The 2008 crash was a
marker. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That kind of answered my question. Thanks.
Okay. So this brings us to an inflection point. That inflection point is important to note because we've got a system that is developed intentionally that's creating incentives for these more terrorist type organizations, although defy me to say that this isn't a terrorist organization itself, right? But, and in fact, I think all those regions would agree with you that the Brussels City of London connection is also a terrorist organization. And I know AI would have a canary if I put that in print. But nevertheless, this is, in my view, the model for terrorism organizations. I just showed you how all of these illicit networks follow the exact same model, and they're doing it with the knowledge of this system on the left. So if that's the case, then we're at an inflection point. It's not just trying to solve the problem region by region. It's trying to break the back of the overall, the arc, if you will, that created this entire environment. Does that make sense to you? Or not? Anybody hear me? Everybody's quiet. Why? Did I just...
I hear you.
Does it make sense what I'm saying is you're breaking the back?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So populism and nationalism started to come up, and I really want to spend a minute on this, because what does nationalism mean? It's top down. Populism is bottom up. And I think it's important to notice those two differences. Why? Because they're being used in the same sentence, and words matter, right? Words definitely matter. So the rise of anti-establishment movements and the national sovereignty agendas actually have competing factions. Does that make sense to you? Nationalism is top down, populism is bottom up. Does that fit? Do you understand that?
Perfectly.
Okay. Deglobalization, when we talk about populism, what is the biggest thing of it? Nationalism actually wants to keep some form of globalization, but populism says, no, we need to become centric to our own countries, right? Country first. It's like everyone's sitting in the back of the class hoping the instructor won't call on them. Thanks, Duppy. You need to get into the chat room because you are a pain in the butt and I want to have a fun. Crypto and digital systems. The one of the things that I think is really important to understand is the rise of crypto. Remember I told you BRICS was formed in 2009. That same year you get the smartphone and Bitcoin. That same year. That's not happenstance. Do you see that? You get it now, right? So when
I sure do.
When they're moving away from actual banking, because the 2008 crash made it so painfully obvious that our global banking system was being manipulated, then the switch had to start happening, and Bitcoin immediately came to the surface. And a couple of years later, you got Ethereum, you've got Tether now. But the whole idea of crypto, and for people that don't get it, I am convinced Bitcoin was intentional to move it out of the actual banking system, and that it was built with a backdoor to trace and track those wallets, which we've now seen proof of that as fact. Think of the Capital Pipeline hostage taking. Remember back in 21, within a couple of months, we had the money back because they watched the wallets, and they couldn't have done it. And remember the ransom was Bitcoin. They couldn't have done that had they not had a backdoor to watch those wallets. So that brought in the whole crypto and digital systems piece, which actually is a part of the long-term undoing. And then you got nationalism, trade tariffs, industrial policy, and protecting strategic industries. The trade nationalism is a top-down enforcement to protect industries within countries. Nationalism isn't always a bad thing if used properly. Energy independence. This is what we're watching Trump put into place right now. And then regional blocks and new alliances. He's creating a multipolar world where bilateral trade agreements, financial and security partnerships are being developed to prevent this system from keeping control. And why do I bring this up? When you talk to a global system that is designed to keep power and control, the one thing that will hurt them is to help other countries exert their own sovereignty with these bilateral deals. And that I've been talking about this from the beginning. John in OKC, populism is a word used by Trump to describe caring for the people and protecting them, but the left uses this word to shield their agenda. Yes, and they use the term nationalism quite frequently. And if you watch, John, if you watch the narrative, the language, because it's important, words matter. If you watch what they're doing, they're now using populism and nationalism in the same sentence. So what they're trying to do is make populism nationalistic, if you will. Come on, stop. So, and I wanted to bring that up because I don't know that people fully understand how words are changed to suit narratives, and they're changed in real time. That's why I brought that up. So nevertheless, we're at an inflection point because trust has been eroded, both in our governance, in our monetary system. The institutional trust is completely eroded. And so we are in a situation where there's so much crises that we're tired, right? And people say it all the time, I'm just tired. And making sense, correct? That's why I brought
Totally.
the human cost piece to this, because we've been the one that have, it's at our expense, right? It's at our expense, all of this, our quality of life, our wealth, all of this is broken down. So we see the family eroded. We see abortion become something that the New World Order has enforced on nations, even nations that were steadfastly against it. We've seen trust, because when you need help, the system isn't there to help you. In fact, it will weaponize you, weaponize against you if you try to seek help. That's personal experience. The security failures at the border, cost of living. I mean, my God, most of us are sitting here wondering how we're going to put food on our table. I know I do. Western veterans in crises. One of the saddest things that we've been watching is this exponential increase in veteran suicide. Which there's other things to do, but you've got veterans that are dying every day by suicide, for a number of reasons. And it isn't just because of the wars they were in, but because the system isn't helping them and they can't take it anymore. So you've got, and we've got, like, Annie works with the people that are very much on the front lines of the opioid epidemic, and the destruction, the absolute destruction that's caused. Deindustrialization. I've mentioned in the past, I grew up in an industrial town. None of those industries are there. By I want to say the late 80s, every industry in my hometown was gone by the mid to late 80s. So crime, we had crime off the charts, even though they tried to manipulate the numbers and hide the true numbers for crime. It didn't take much for us to see crime in our own neighborhoods. So take all of this into consideration, because this is a direct result of everything I just laid out. I hope that now puts that into perspective for people. I hope it does anyway. Let me move on. So what is the inflection point? The inflection point is that point where exposure creates a workaround that, I'm trying to word this carefully. Exposure of something creates a workaround that provides a more permanent solution. I'm going to take you back. Remember 2003? When Bush was on the aircraft carrier, he called mission accomplished. That was in May. The $12 billion moved later that month and into June. You see the workaround? He's explaining the government piece is over. The shadow system took over. It created a permanent pipeline. That's that $12 billion right there. So the control handed to the Coalition Provisional Authority, CPA, that was under Paul Bremer, I don't know if you remember this stuff, but then the money to fund that happened right after Bush said mission accomplished. So for those of you that continue to look at the Oval Office as the source of your pain, this is pointing to the fact it's not the Oval Office, it's the deep state and the shadow government. Do you now see this? Is it obvious to you? I hope it is.
It is.
Clear.
Okay. So the audits then started happening, and it revealed there was intentionally no tracking, no receipts, no accountability. And notice when this is happening, 6.6 billion could not be accounted for per the SIGR estimate. This is the panel that was developed to audit. They couldn't find this money. It just vanished, completely vanished. Half of the money sent, they have no idea what happened to it. When you start looking at this system and realizing they're funneling money that's created a 26-year war, that when that ends, it created other hotspots, i.e. Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, Iran, and then they infused money as needed. Ooh. So sorry about that. I don't know where that cough came from, but it created a sneeze.
Bless you.
Thank you. Okay, sorry for that delay. I'm hoping this slide lands on your conscious thinking. Do you think? Rethinking how all this comes together. I would love to hear your input.
I love it because we knew it was a machine. We just didn't know how it operated, and that there isn't all these elected people that are coming out of this top hat with all these magical powers. You know, there really is a system and a structure, and has been for a long time.
So
People find out that there's 12 more billion, Feisty, and it just keeps going up. It's incredulous. The amount of money
I want to refocus you, because it was 12 billion in 2003 and 2004, but it was only 1.7 billion in 2015-16. So the fixes that were being put in place, of course they lagged, but it did create a disruption, just not enough. Does that make sense for you?
Yeah, I wasn't looking at it that way. I was just going, the 2.3 and 9/11 and cha-ching and all the stuff we're finding out now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was looking at it from a different perspective.
That's why I wanted to bring this in. I've talked about the mission accomplished slide. I've used this on other slides in the past, trying to show that was a break. He was making a break. The system picked up from there and created an exception and a workaround. Do you now see it? Is it obvious to you now?
Yeah.
As sad as it is. And just remember, millions are dying, and what is the purpose? Power and control. And so hopefully it's landing now. That's my goal. And I don't see anybody making comments. Okay, you're having different conversations. Okay. So when I talk to the absolute peak of the global feedback loop, you're talking about these monies moving, but then you got to ask the question, who actually received the money? I've shown you this before, especially if you're in my chat. There was a congressional hearing in 2016 There's the guy that gave the hearing. I've shown you the testimony where he said, and I'm going to read this directly. This is from July of 2016. There's only one purpose for which cash in that amount is useful, and that is to do what Iran has been doing around the world, which is acting as a sponsor of terrorism. It is not useful for infrastructure projects, which we were told are very much the concern of the Iranians because of their economy. Iranians do not pay Iranians in euros and Swiss francs. Remember that 1.7 billion was in euros and Swiss francs, remember? Trump said that the banks in Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. were emptied out. When you recognize that you've got multiple countries using that banking system, what it's saying is they emptied their banking system. What is this really talking to? I showed you this before. When you're talking euros and Swiss francs, you're talking Brussels, right? This is a result of the Brussels network. Does this make sense, finally?
Sure does.
The only conceivable purpose for this money is to finance illicit activities because the cash is untraceable. This is the reason that the Iranians insisted on it, and why we agreed to it is something that I think this committee ought to probe. So this is why the Iranians insisted on it. Do you think maybe that's a blackmail? Which is what I've been positing for years. The United States was blackmailed. Not just the United States, the collective West, I think is a better term. What do you think? Now that I've shown you the system, you can see what they have to blackmail over, don't you? Or don't you? Everybody gets so quiet.
Should we be furious that we were blackmailed? I mean, I would think so.
I would think it would be. I would think you would be furious over the fact that there are players in the system that, rather than exposure, they would pay off a country. Which part and parcel explains the lower amount of money, but this is his testimony. This is straight out of his testimony, which I've shown you the link to that testimony. This is the guy that gave it. I watched this hearing live. By the way, this is just a couple of days before Crossfire Hurricane was officially opened up. Interesting connection, don't you think? After he says, very nicely says the U.S. was blackmailed. What do you think?
Good Lord, when you get those dates going and you connect dates to events, that blows my mind. That's what proved everything was connected.
Right. Yeah, I keep warning people, stop looking at things as independent, outside the overall. Why? You've got a huge conspiracy case being built out of Fort Pierce, Florida. All of this is a part of that. Every bit of it. So, hopefully now you see what I'm talking about, because you've got an untraceable fueling of money that is funding terrorism, that started with Brussels and City of London, that was leveraged by these groups to evade the sanctions and the rules that were put on them. And it's created this symbiotic relationship, if you will, between Brussels and all of these regions. And why do I say symbiotic? Because Brussels needed the conflict. That's how you keep money flowing. The regions needed the conflict because that's how you stop takeover. So it becomes symbiotic to both use the same system. Whether you have counter purposes or not, you're both leveraging the same system. And who pays for it? You and I. Hopefully this is making sense. I don't see a whole lot of comments, so I'm going to continue to move on. Let's talk about the forensic document, because the system itself bypasses its own watchdog. So you start putting in these rules that are designed, from the public's purview, they're designed to stop it. Yet they build in exceptions and bypasses in those rules that most people don't catch. And so the Senate hearing from 2016 highlighted this. And here, these are just 3 quotes. The only conceivable purpose for this money is to finance illicit activities because the cash is untraceable. That is the reason the Iranians insisted on it and why we agreed to it. Iranians do not pay Iranians in euros and Swiss francs. In other words, this is untraceable money that was being quickly converted. As far as purchasing equipment overseas, paying the money by paying money that was transferred to Iran out of Iran in cash is not the most economical or the most convenient way. So obviously there was another purpose. There is present in the world another rogue state, North Korea. Trump today talked about there was another country that was supposed to get this money that is cash starved and that has an active nuclear program. And when you have a cash starved country like North Korea, that poses a distinct danger. So some of that money was supposed to go to North Korea. How many of you remember this syndrome in 2017, 18 called the fatigue mountain syndrome? Do you guys remember this?
Oh, yeah. That mountain that just got tired and fell.
It just got tired and fell in on itself. Just happened to be over an enrichment site, right?
What a coinky dink.
It was a nuclear enrichment, nuclear research site. Remember this fatigued mountain just, after all these years, it just suddenly said, that's it, I give up, and caved in.
Yep.
So
fascinating.
Trump said today, I'm not going to tell you who that other country is. I immediately knew he was talking about Korea. And it was just funny because that piece was added to the chat to talk about, and I'd already built this slide talking about it. So here you go. So there was like I said, that hearing was, and I've got to go back. I always meant to go find the link to the actual hearing. I found the testimony, but the actual video of the hearing is quite illuminating, the questions back and forth. And like I said, I watched it live when it happened. So the elements of Trotskyism in the Brussels City of London feedback loop. I think now is a fair time to talk about it. What is Trotsky? So you had Marx come up with this theory for government control. Lenin believed that the theory was perfect for Russia. Trotsky believed that this theory was perfect for the world. And the best way to implement that theory was through permanent revolution, permanent unrest. And what you're watching, although AI hates this slide, it had to finally agree that it is a historical perspective that needs to be discussed. Trotskyism perfectly explains everything we've been watching with the City of London, Brussels coalition and the constant crises that are no sooner does one end, another begins, keep going all the way through the history, but it creates that permanent instability that Trotsky was very much in line with. So it reflects, this system is reflected through what Trotsky said. We have no stable nations. We're in perpetual revolution. Constantly, we're seeing governments being overthrown. We're seeing the constant battle back and forth for that. We have a transnational elite who rule everything. This is shadow government. We have manufactured consent where propaganda and education and the media are programming people to believe something to prevent any resistance. Economic system as a weapon. We've seen this over and over and over again where economic terrorism is a real thing, and that's not affected by places like Venezuela or Iran. That's affected by Brussels and City of London. And then the end goal is you end up with a one world system, a new world order. When you can reduce the sovereignty of all the nations, unfettered migration, which we've seen all around the world, the the cross-border transfers of money that don't adhere to any rules-based order, all of that feeds into what Trotsky believed was the perfect solution for the world. I know this is bold. I know this is put out there. This is based on my own research over years. And yes, AI hated this slide and kept saying, this is not a good slide. But I believe that this is a point. We're at a point where it needs to be said out loud. What are your thoughts?
Can I jump in here first? Sorry, everybody.
Absolutely.
I hate to say this, Feisty. I hate to say this. I really totally agree with you. And I'm going to tell you why. Because, and I'm not just not saying that. Because 21, when everything started to implode, to define this with a name. At first it became, oh, they're authoritarian. Then that didn't quite fit it. And then they became more totalitarian in the feel. Then there was CRT that was introduced, which nobody even knew the acronym, much less what it meant. And that kind of went to cultural Marxism. And all these names, these words kept evolving. Then we said, well, no, maybe they're more like fascist. That didn't quite fit the bill. And then we said, well, it's socialism. And it ain't that either. And then it was communism. So you're right. If you look at all the people, the Stalin and the Lenin and the march to the institutions and all the things that we've watched happen, this fits it better than anything. I'm not just saying it. I'm not blowing smoke. You're right. I really think you're right.
Well, thank you.
Take that. You're welcome.
I appreciate that. Like I said, it is interesting to me that when Trotsky was exposed in Russia, where did he go? He hopped a boat to New York. Who did he talk to? The Writers Guild in New York, the Columbia University in New York. Where are some of the radicals coming out of? Oh yeah, Columbia University. When you start looking at the path that Trotsky took and coincide that with the degradation of what we considered a morally based society, that suddenly has socialism as a utopia, you can't dismiss the Trotsky connection. Hopefully people see it. Yes, S. Jones, I think these networks are being finally exposed and dismantled, which is why I thought this was a timely presentation. Keep this going. The pipeline and conflict networks, if you look at what this guy said, the Trump response, I look at him as more of a circuit breaker on a motherboard. And then what he's been putting in place, the Abraham Accords, regional integration, the bilateral trade agreements, all of this is absolutely used. First we expose, then we dismantle the individual networks, which we've been watching, and create an environment where literally, as Trump says, peace is the prize. And we see this over decades in the building. This isn't just Trump, by the way. This can't be just Trump, by the way. He couldn't do this by himself. There had to be other ways of doing this. And that $12 billion in 2003 and 4 is a huge tell of how long we've been investigating and researching and trying to figure out how to fix. I hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to dismiss what President Trump is doing. What I'm trying to say is this is not done in 4 years. And it took a lot of people doing the right thing to do this. Hopefully that is now something you can understand and see. Remember, how did we start tracing and tracking the money? You got BRICS, you got the smartphone, you got Bitcoin right after the crash. Isn't that interesting how we can now start tracing what's going on here? And going back to what this guy said in his hearing, cash is untraceable. Reiterates how Bitcoin was used at the time. I'm just telling you that for the rhetoric that's out there, when you dig deeper, you can see that there's a counterplay all along. Hopefully you see that. Am I being articulate enough? I hope I am.
Absolutely. And what I was thinking about too is that in order for them to do this recognition, to recognize and start to dismantle, there is, I find this like the great unmasking. So when you were talking about Trotsky and we're unmasking all of these plans. When I think of God bless Oregon and Washington State, that's exactly the plan for those states. And this is what we're seeing. And to see that we're doing more than ever, they haven't just taken a chisel; they took a sledgehammer to this, and it's ramped it up so much. But in order for it to make sense that all of this is happening, you have to know the history, which is what you've provided.
Or I'm trying to, yeah.
Yeah, but that's exactly what people need. We have to know the history in order to understand. To me, it's unbelievable that we haven't fallen quicker than those last 4 years, but we were adding up to it. But my God has been really so good to just keep us going. So,
which is why I now say, by the way, Annie, why I now say that $700 billion in 2008 was necessary. I know that's hard to square, but that $700 billion bailout was needed. It kept our economy on a thread while we worked to build a plan to dismantle it, in my view.
Knowing what I know now, yes, I agree entirely.
Mm-hmm. I know that's my opinion and it's not well received, but a lot of things I say aren't well received. So let me keep going, because now we got to get into, S. Jones asked the question, these networks are finally being exposed and dismantled, right? Yes. This is where President Trump comes in. It's a final phase, if you will. We go through the exposure phase. We had the leaks. We saw globalization expand. We saw conflict increase. Now it's time for the backlash. You've watched the system. You watch how the system fed itself. You watch how it increased in severity, not decreased. And so now let's talk about, how do we dismantle this? What is going on that we can confidently say that it's being dismantled? One of the things you have to remember is this whole process that I laid out from 2008 to 2020 is very important to the timeline, because we had the financial crises. We exposed both LIBOR and Zanjani in 2012. We had what is called the leak era. We had all those papers leaked that I showed you. We saw and experienced the acceleration of these parallel systems. And then the new rail systems, when in 2016 we start really pushing Bitcoin and alternative currencies to the point where we're now at a maximum pressure. And you've heard the term maximum pressure used quite a bit by Scott Bessent and Trump himself. That's where we watched as weapons, sanctions were weaponized. We saw that with Russia. You see it still. You saw the SWIFT access restricted to Russia. We can see that that's happened in other times. But the global financial system has been fracturing right along. It's been competing with itself, actually, and its own settlement architecture, which is interesting because the blockchain-based pair-up with the SWIFT system is designed to prevent that fracture. So what it looks like is you've got this competing world order, Brussels, City of London, that wouldn't want the pair up with blockchain. And yet they're not winning that battle, or at least on the stage they are, because, we can't get that vote across the finish line here in this country. But that is your solution. It is a huge solution, because now you can trace and track money on an immutable, nobody can alter it, on an immutable blockchain. So the core here is, the harder the centralized systems pushed enforcement and dependency, the more incentive states and networks had to build alternative systems. Those alternative systems they kept building are data points. So you put them in a position to create their own downfall. Is that beautiful or what?
It's so brilliant that it's just, your jaw just drops open when you see they handed it a noose,
mm-hmm.
and then they put him in a room with a chair underneath a beam.
Said, you put your neck in it and then kick your own chair out.
Yeah. It's like, go ahead and jump.
But I think that's why it's important to understand the whole history.
Okay, so fast forward. Wait, just wait. I need to know this. Since you did bring up, the blockchain and, this kind of delay with the Clarity Act, what's the culmination look like?
Exposure.
What comes down?
I think what ends up happening, because you're not going to get Brussels to say, you got me, I give up. You got to create a crisis. And I've been saying for years that I believe we're going to have a 2008 style crisis where Congress is going to be forced to vote for the Clarity Act or have certain financial destruction. That's my opinion. It sure does look like we're coming there. And in fact, what was interesting, it just came out that the Virginia economy has less than a month before it collapses. Less than a month. All the timelines are coming together.
Boy, they sure are.
Yeah. And Virginia is a huge economy for these secret societies, by the way. So
yeah, that's right at their back door.
It is right here. So what we're seeing is under the Trump administration, both in term 1 and now especially in term 2, for those that think Trump didn't know how to deal with this in his first term, I couldn't be more in disagreement. They were still mapping, right? And, but a lot of what they mapped then is being put into place now. And he is severing that connection, right, between the entrenched system and what the new system is. He is literally sitting there with the plug in his hand and pulling it apart. So we are America first. We are restoring our sovereignty. We're ending our dependency on this global system and totally breaking the back of this entrenched system. And I will prove that here in the next few slides. Let me keep going. What has he been using? He's been using maximum pressure campaigns like there's nobody's business. We've seen this relentless sanctions, secondary sanctions, export controls. We've been watching this. Energy independence. We are now a net exporter, like he says. Trade and tariff leverage. As much as they keep trying to stop the tariffs, he has avenues for tariffs, and even the Supreme Court admitted that. Withdrawal from enabling pacts, the JCPOA, the WHO, Paris Accord, some of the UN committees and such like that. He's getting out of those one-sided agreements that were literally capital siphons from the U.S. economy. Financial transparency. He's targeting the illicit finance. We've watched that with all of these Venezuela, with the cartels, the Iranian networks and all of that. We've been watching. If you go up to OFAC, it is right out there for all to see that they've been going after all the illicit finance and the beneficial ownerships. And those shell company networks are now so exposed that we can actually go after people, right? Declassification. We're shining a light on the extent, the breadth and depth of the corruption, both through the abuse of our intelligence systems, through the institutional capture that we've been watching for years. All of this is coming out right now. Why do you think we got the JFK files, the MLK files, the Nixon files? Keep going down the list of all these files that have been coming out. That declassification is exposing a deeply entrenched system that emboldened after each one of these cases. And that exposure is creating a spotlight, if you will, think Maya Wiley, on the institutional capture that has been happening, that has been controlling our government. Maya Wiley, LCCHR, the MIC is 1,500 umbrella organizations under that umbrella. When you keep going down and you think about all these other digs that I've presented, hopefully now you can see where all of this is coming together. With our sovereignty being restored, we are no longer the tool of choice to be used as a hammer on these other countries. Think about what they did. They used our military as a hammer. They used our money as capital to fund the crises they were creating. They used the reputation of the United States. Go anywhere in Europe and they will tell you what's wrong with the U.S. Yes, Duppy, I have a pet dove. His name is Koo. Nevertheless, you listen to what Vance said. It's time for them to look in the mirror. He just said that the other day. You see this in real time, and it's not by accident. You're watching the exposure campaign. Does this make sense to you guys? It is total disruption. And is everybody quiet because you can't digest it or you don't know what to say?
That's clear as a bell.
I see it too.
So let's talk about each of those networks I showed you earlier and how he's been shutting them down. I'm not going to focus on the whole slide. I've for those of you in Rumble and Pilled, if you go to my Telegram chat room, you will see that I uploaded these slides I'm showing. And you can look at them yourself. And I just realized, you know what I didn't do? I'm going to get in trouble with my own chat room. I didn't put my logo on any of the slides. So please recognize that this is my research, my creative thought. Give credit where credit is due. And I have to do a trust-based thing here right now.
Amen, sister.
Okay.
That's okay. Well, maybe we'll find some leakers.
We'll see. So when we're talking about shutting down the loopholes, the system he's using to do that, the interventions that he's been putting in place, because these are real interventions that he's applying consistently across the board. He's going the secrecy. He's removing that veil of secrecy that has been over this system for decades. And we're seeing the jurisdictions. We're seeing where the sanctions are being levied, right? He's literally saying out loud, if you screw with the sanctions we're employing, in other words, if you try to bypass them, you are now sanctioned. So he's doing secondary sanctions. Harder to hide ownership. He's done the beneficial ownership stuff. Enablers are being held accountable. We're now literally going after the enabler lever. Right? The enabler layer that we've seen. So literal people are being held accountable. Financial gates are being closed. These high risk entities and jurisdictions that were exploiting our markets are now being blocked from the U.S. markets. This is where the bilateral trade deals are coming in, and correspondent banking is being given a facelift. We're watching that in real time. The assets, illicit wealth is being exposed, and now we're freezing and forcing them to forfeit that wealth. You see that with all the DOJ actions that are taken, how much is being forfeited. They're being literally told in the indictments, you must forfeit this amount of money. And then the global standards are being raised because the stronger this process is, the more normalized it becomes. And we now can share this data cross-border. And it's giving other jurisdictions that have been equally victimized the ability to also combat what's going on in their own countries. And we're watching this in real time. I don't know how people keep missing this because it's so in your face right now. Wouldn't you agree? Or not.
No, I agree. And the way you lay it out, though, we're so lucky because we've got a leg up on those people.
Right.
People are missing the whole point.
Well, for 20 years, we've been tracking them, right?
Right. But you know how lazy people are about reading and doing work and research. We are really blessed. We have so much information now. You can't deny it.
Right. So, like I was telling you, I've been researching this stuff for years, but I've researched it from a different perspective than most. It's not about what they did to us. I've always wanted to know what we're doing to combat it. So what you're seeing in this deck is a culmination of that research, because for every action is an equally opposing reaction. And my goal has been to show the equally opposing reactions so that you get a sense that we're not sitting ducks waiting to be shot. Right? Here is the Hezbollah. We increased sanctions and then ultimately actually enforced the very sanctions we increased. In the past, sanctions been levied, but there's been workarounds. And so they were never really truly enforced. We've actually disrupted a lot of these illicit network money flows. We've watched that in real time. We exposed the enablers, the Zanjanis, the Shamkhanis. You can keep going down the list. I showed that just the other day, on Monday, in fact, the 6 primary networks. Offshore access has been reduced because those accounts have been closed and their assets frozen. And we've seen that in real time. The terror financing has been weakened because now money can't get there. And then now, as a result of everything we've been watching, we now have a clearer picture because the veil of secrecy has been lifted and we have heightened transparency. So there's your Hezbollah network. Look at the exposing the Russian shadow fleet. Now, there's a debate that is valid to have. Did Russia do this to preserve itself? Yes. Did it increase conflict in Ukraine? Well, by definition, yes. Does it mean Ukraine is the bad guy, Russia's the good guy? I mean, the jury's still out on that. One fact is real, though, especially since the FTX revelations, is there were not so savory power players involved in Ukraine. And their purpose was to siphon off the wealth that was being sent to Ukraine. And I think when the story is said and done, it's not about Ukraine or Russia. It's about those networks that were using Ukraine to enrich themselves, to fund these other processes. Remember when I showed you that feedback loop, whatever they made out of Ukraine could then be funneled through these other hotspots that Trump has been feverishly trying to end. And like he said, he's ended 9 wars. This is pretty darn good. So the Russia shadow fleet, what were they doing? They were so heavily sanctioned. In fact, they've been sanctioned. It used to be the G8. Now it's the G7. They actually kicked Russia out of the G8. So now it's the G7. This system was set up because the West just started targeting Russia. What was the goal? When you paint Russia as a nuclear-enabled country that's ready to push that button for a nuclear war, which Russia has absolutely said they aren't, you can use that fear as a weapon on the rest of the world, which is what they've been doing. So it behooved the West to constantly present Russia with that element of fear. In the process of doing that, Russia has been locked out of many markets, which is what pushed them into the hands of Iran and China, which is really interesting in the grand scheme of things because of what we're watching unravel. Nevertheless, in order to fund their own country, the survival of their own country, because that's where it really starts, and to move products so that they have a revenue stream, they developed this Russia shadow fleet. We've been going after that shadow fleet. We've been going after the vessels. We've been going after the entities that are moving those products, and the individuals that are being blacklisted are all up on OFAC. You can go see that. And that shipping avenue has been dismantled. So then you beg the question, well, if they did this for their own survival, why are we hurting them? Well, because when it comes down to the brass knuckles, war is war is war, and you're trying to end the conflict, all parties become the target. Which is, again, why I keep pointing to Trump isn't talking to these countries. He's talking to Brussels and the city of London. Now, hopefully, you start to see what I mean by all parties become the target. Because the same time he's doing this, what has he been doing? He's been challenging Brussels at every step of the way. Go back and listen to his speeches in Davos. Back and listen to the speeches at the World Economic Forum. Go back and listen to them. He is telling them, oh, it isn't just Russia I'm after you too. And we've talked about this. We've shown it. Keep going down to the legal risk, because the more enforcement we have, the litigation and asset seizures increase. So if you watch what's going on in DOJ, you're watching asset forfeitures. I've never seen as many. I don't know about you guys. And then we're also getting complete transparency. So this is the Russia shadow fleet. Let me show you the Mekong, because this was really a big deal that doesn't get a whole lot of public attention. Disrupted revenue flows, banking, crypto, cash pipelines crippled, billions in illicit proceeds were cut off. Let me point out something with this particular scam, the cyber scam. This was a multi-country effort, by the way. It wasn't just the U.S. This is multi-country. We've seen efforts in China. We've seen efforts in Thailand, Singapore. In Singapore, there were 30,000 accounts frozen. 15,000 accounts were blacklisted. And it was all from this. That just happened 2 years ago. So just keep in mind, this is a global effort, which is why I wanted to bring it up. And I forgot to add that to the slide, by the way, and I should have. But the safe havens are all under scrutiny now because host governments can no longer hide behind them. So the enablers for those systems are all being exposed. Victims are being protected. We've seen record numbers of people being rescued from these human trafficking rings, whether it's for sex or labor. Untold numbers of victims are being rescued. And then global security is being strengthened because when they're no longer operating in these regions, you don't have a hotspot. And so the whole Southeast Asia corridor now is being actually freed in real time. And not a lot of people are talking about it, which is sad because it's a huge story. And then again, sovereignty is being advanced. So I know I'm going through this quickly because it's already been a long time. The cartel trade, again, look at what he did. He secured the borders. He disrupted the flow of chemicals. I'm going to take you back to October of 2025. Kash Patel is sitting before Congress. He was talking about how he was working with his partners in China, going after the companies that were making the precursor chemicals that are going into Mexico to make fentanyl. And he said that as they started to tramp down on those companies in China, that those companies went to India. I bring this up many times because it shows that they're constantly trying to adapt. But he knew they were going to India, so we immediately started working with India. And I've brought this up many times. Why? Because that Trump is dead tweet, that hashtag that kept going out on X. The first day, it was in Spanish. It was out of Venezuela. The second day, on Saturday, it was in English. It was coming out of India. So the Trump is dead is a direct connect to these criminal organizations. Financial isolation. We've seen more money blocked and accounts frozen than we've ever seen. The shell companies absolutely are running out of opportunity. And then we're restoring not just trade per se, but the trade routes, the trade rules, the whole idea of trade coming from a sovereign nation. We're watching that be restored. And as a direct result, we're watching our economies get stronger. Now, let me point out, I know things are tough financially for most of us. I know for me, but if we weren't winning, price per barrel would be over $140 a barrel. We would already be in a recession, if not a depression, and we're not. Keep that in mind. So while prices are still high, they're not as high as they were, but it's still a big owie at our kitchen table. I just want to put into perspective that what he's been doing to dismantle this has been working. And then finally, I want to get into the Dubai Gulf. This was a really big deal. We talked about it heavily when it happened, when they went after the money changers. But look at what he did. They went after sanctions. So UAE had no choice but to step in. The illicit finance was absolutely constrained. We had dozens of money changers arrested. The trade integrity was restored because the bilateral trade agreements required that this happened. Trade integrity is restored as a result of that. Stronger AML CFT frameworks are both in place now, and there are strong sanctions for non-compliance as a result. ownership, beneficial ownership is more exposed, and we have our strategic pipelines are now protected. So when you've got illicit wealth being restored, that means a system is going down and we're winning. I can't even underscore that. So when you dismantle the incentive structure, and this is a big deal, I'm almost done. Dismantling the incentive structure requires not just a plan, but a constant hammer and a consistently applied hammer. One of the biggest problems with the system that we're trying to come out of, the web we're trying to come out from under, is that rules were inconsistently enforced, and it showed a two-tiered system where the beneficial recipients of the weakness in the rules were not you and I. Now you're consistently enforcing rules across the board, whether you're somebody with the billionaires, NGOs, we're seeing attention applied equally across the board. That's a big deal. And the new direction that this Trump administration has taken is not something that you should dismiss, because we've not seen this kind of throughput in the past. I'm going to start landing now, because I started out with calling this deck the long arc of disruption. From Kennedy's secret society statement through the Nixon era, the coup, which people are now starting to recognize, you know what, it was actually a coup, to when they attempted to kill Reagan and the acceleration of globalization, through the post 9/11 era, to the financial crises in 2008. And now we're in a polycrisis, because now it's not just enough to have war or conflict. Now we're using all the tools at our disposal, whether it's censorship, pandemics, crises. They're just throwing everything at us. That typically happens when somebody's losing. It's like the grand finale of a fireworks display, but they're still not winning. Hopefully you can see that. What's really important to note here is that we've been behind, right? Technology wise, enforcement wise, we've been behind for decades. We're starting to see signs where that's not true. That's been reversed. And it takes us to this point. And I'm going to land in another place, but I wanted to point out that, and I think it's fair to do this, as much as I adore President Trump, he couldn't have done this without years behind him of a lot of research, of a lot of activity, a lot of actions to trace and track. He's able to do what you're watching right now because of what's been developed over decades. I can't underscore that. When he said, I don't need a peace award, peace is the prize, he's 1000% spot on. When he said back in 2017, I studied history, now hopefully you have an understanding of what he meant when he said, I studied history. You've got successive administrations that were not in a position to do anything about what was happening. Take as a good example, the Nixon coup. He knew what happened. He fell on his sword because he knew the country not only couldn't handle it, but we weren't in a position to fight against it. So here we are. It's a new day, a new epoch, a new era. And we're looking at a point where that historical perspective is now brought to bear, and we're able to employ whatever it takes to take care of this system once and for all. And then finally, I'm ending on this, that long arc of disruption. We listened to Monica Crowley paint these three presidents. Washington is the founder of the Republic, Lincoln is the savior of the Republic, and Trump is the reformer of the Republic. Not necessarily reformer, he's a restorer of the Republic. It's a bad word there. But I do think when history looks back on what we're watching right now, this is exactly how it will be remembered. And with that, that is my deck. I would like your comments. Anybody, any thoughts, any comments? If you agree, if you disagree, I want to hear it all. Generally, I would like to know what you think. Is that a clap?
It is.
Thank you so much. So what do you think? What changed for you? What, as a result of this deck, what changed for you?
I'm feeling more hopeful than ever.
Say that again. Say that again. You're what?
I'm feeling more hopeful than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand a lot more than I did. Listen, I wish I had $1 million to give you, because this has been a doctorate level education that I've gotten over the last 7 years with you. I'd love to pay you for my doctorate. Thank you very much.
For what it's worth, if anybody wants to support my work, and there's my bird. See, there's Koo. He just landed on my head. Can you see him? Yes, Koo is our dove. Come on, move. There you go. He's on my chair now. Koo was rescued from a shelter about 15 years ago. Come on, Koo, stop. My grandson named him Koo. Of course, he was 3 at the time. We rescued him from the shelter. They had him in the cat room. The poor bird was quivering. So we brought him home. We paid $10, brought him home. We didn't think he was going to last that long. That was about 15 years ago. Finally looked it up. They live about 25 years. So he's probably got 8 to 10 years left of his lifespan. So that said, thank you, Annie, for those comments. And I'm dead serious when I say I really want to hear your thoughts and comments. These are things, and you can reiterate or you can agree or disagree, but I've been trying to talk about this stuff for a long time. And I have had these comments and these conversations. But I don't think, even though I've done decks to show it, what I'm hoping is you'll agree that this kind of pulls it all together, at least in a different way of looking at it, so that you can see that there are good people doing hard work. And that this country, while we're at a precipice, because it truly is a precipice, while we're at a precipice, this country isn't lost. Hopefully you can see that. Anybody have any thoughts?
Definitely. And please support Feisty's work. Join the chat. Come in. Our chats at night are phenomenal, and you can always replay them in the morning if your time zone is different. But anything that you can offer to Feisty to just give her kudos and appreciation for all this hard work, all these hours she spends, and just the breadth and depth of her research, it's incomparable. So
I appreciate that. I love you right back. For what it's worth, guys, the Wednesday chat is supposed to be a collective of things that my chat room pulls together to discuss in Wednesday's chat. This deck was something I was preparing for lifting the veil tomorrow. I'll probably look to Sean to redoing it tomorrow. We'll see what he says, but so that it's on 2 different channels. But I pulled it together because it wasn't enough to discuss, and I appreciate the opportunity to present it, at least as a first draft, if you will. Anybody have any thoughts on how I could improve on this deck? Please let me know. I've tried to be as thorough as possible with pulling my thoughts together. So for my chat room, I see that there's nearly 30 of us in this chat room. Not a whole lot of comments coming out of the chat room, which is disappointing. Any thoughts, any final thoughts? Let's land. It's almost 7:30. I want to give it, I'll close the deck out by 7:25, which is in 7 minutes. Let's use the last 7 minutes for any final thoughts or comments.
It's like an overlay for the takedown, how they're doing it. That's what I see when I look at it. It's like an overlay. You can see step by step what they're doing.
Feels good to see it though, right?
Oh yeah. And I did put in here that Q drop with Death Blossom. Kind of refers back to all these diseases and stuff that are all happening right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if that's not what it was a reference to. Like an overlay for the takedown. How they're doing it.
Who's got their mic open? There's a delay, so when you talk. Okay, thank you, Ann Boyer. She gave me $50. I really Really appreciate that. Jax, love you right back. I really do appreciate you guys. Quest, thank you so much for your comments. Said much appreciated. Feisty deck is great. Very much appreciate these comments. Like I said, please, if you've not joined my channel on Telegram, we're not a very big channel. There's only about 1,300 of us in the channel. Please come in and let's have another conversation. And after prayer time tonight, we will pick up where we leave off here and discuss this deck. There are now 23 people in this chat on Telegram that are watching this deck. I'm looking forward to a very fruitful discussion tonight. So what do you guys, whatever you think, however you take it, please rewind, please re-listen. The slides for this deck have been uploaded in my Telegram channel. I can't upload it into the chats, as you know. But please go through them. I would love to hear your thoughts. With that, I am going to close out. You guys have a very blessed evening. For those in the Telegram chat, we will be closing out, and I will reopen in time for our prayer time. Have a blessed evening, everybody. You're most welcome.
Unmasking the players in the shadowed game, where the silence breaks, the hidden shakes. She names the unspoken.